a folk tale from Africa, from Ethiopia, entitled The Lions of Whisker. How he hated the sound of the women's wailing as they stood around his cold, still, motionless mother. She was gone. She was lost to him. His father Bakila, could see that his son was struggling, and he too was struggling, for he had lost a wife, a good, kind-hearted wife. Well, the two of them, they struggled on for many months, and then eventually Bakila decided he'd have to find a new wife for him, a new mother for his son. And so he went up into the mountains there in Ethiopia, and he spoke with the tribal elders, and he said, I'm looking for a good-hearted woman who could be my wife and a mother to my son. Well, they liked him, and he was wealthy, he had many cattle. And so some young women were introduced to him, and eventually one young woman by the name of Kibret decided she would have him as her husband. But it was hard for her. It was hard for her because when she made food for her stepson, he would push it away and he'd say, I don't like it. It doesn't taste like the food my mother made. He'd remember the delicious stew she made, the begwat, the warm injera bread. And he'd just push Kibret's food away. And when she made him clothes, well, he'd put them on in the morning, and in the evening when he came back, they would be ripped and they would be dirty, and Kibret would wring her hands and she would want to be cross, but she knew she couldn't. One day, she'd had a bad day of it, and he'd come in once again. He'd refused to eat the food, his clothes were torn once again, and she went to him and she said, please, please take some care. I'm doing my best. I make you fine clothing. I cook for you. And he said, leave me alone. You're not my mother. And he ran out. He ran out of that little hut in which they lived together, and he ran all the way down to the river. And he picked up some great stones and he flung them into the water in a rage. When Kibret's husband came home, she explained what had happened with tears in her eyes. And Bakila went off to find his son, and he found him there, still flinging great stones into the river. And he put his arm around his son's shoulder. And a little later they came home. But that night Kibret couldn't sleep. She thought, I must do something. I must find a way to help my stepson to trust and to love me. Early in the morning, as soon as Sad and Bakila had gone, she walked to the edge of the village to where there was a single hut. It was the hut of the Sangoma, the witch doctor, and she knocked on the door and she heard a voice, come, come. And she went inside, and there she saw an old man. And she said, you don't know me. I'm new to this village. I am Bakila's new wife. I want you to help me. How am I to help you? I want you to make a love potion for my stepson. You ask a great deal. There will need to be one ingredient. You must go and bring me the whisker of a mountain lion. What? The whisker of a mountain lion? How on earth am I to do that? You will find a way if you truly want your stepson to learn to love you. Oh, she walked back. Her head hung low. But the next day she got up bright and early, and she went to a local market and she bought some meat. She talked to some of the villagers and she found out where the mountain lion's lair lay. And then she walked across the plains and she scrambled up into the foothills until there in the distance she could see a lion. And she thought, how will I ever get close to this beast? And she walked as close as she dared. She hid behind a rock and she put the meat down on the ground. And then she backed away. And from a distance she watched as the lion sniffed the air and slowly padded over to the meat and devoured it. Each and every day after that, she would go to the marketplace, she would buy some meat, she would walk across the plains, she would go up through the foothills, and she would lay the meat down there outside the lion's lair. And each and every day, she backed off a little less. Weeks passed, months passed. Eventually, she was so close that she could almost smell the lion's breath. And then one day, she thought, it's now or never. I must do it. And though she went towards the lion, she lay the meat upon the ground. And the lion was used to her scent. He was used to the smell and the taste of the meat. And he began to devour the meat. And then she took a knife and carefully she cut the whisker. And slowly she began to back away, fearful at any moment that the lion might leap and devour her. She backed away until she was a safe enough distance to turn and run. And then she ran all the way down the foothills. She ran across the plains, all the way back. Puffing and panting, she arrived at the door of the witch doctor's hut. And she knocked. Enter. She pushed open the door, and there was the witch doctor. And she said, I have it. I have what you sent me out to fetch. I have the whisker of a mountain lion. Now will you make me the love potion? And he said, show it to me. And she passed it over to him, and he looked at it and said, indeed, this is the whisker of a mountain lion. And then he walked over to the fire in the very centre of that hut, and he let the whisker fall. Tss! What on earth are you doing? It took me months. It took me months to get that. Now my stepson will never love me. Think what you did in order to get the lion's whisker. Well, I was patient. I was careful. I approached it little by little, each and every day. And so it is with your stepson. You must be patient. You must grow a little closer to him each and every day. And she said, I think I understand. In fact, this is what I have been doing all this time. And then she turned and she walked away. But she remembered the lesson she'd learned. And all the time, she was patient and kind to her stepson. And then one day, he came to her after he'd eaten the meal she'd prepared, and he said, Kibret, come with me. Come with me to the river. And they walked down to the river, and then he sat down, and she sat down next to him. And then he said, Kibret, I miss my mother so much. And tears began to trickle down his face, and she put her arm around his shoulder. And then he told his story, and she listened. And then he picked up a stone, and he threw it, and it skittered across the surface of the water. And he looked at his stepmother, and he said, You are kind. I thank you for your kindness. And the two of them, they walked back hand in hand. For now, she'd earned his trust, and all because she'd had the courage to go and take the whisker of a ferocious mountain lion.